7 years since Marvel officially announced a Blade movie, and we still have not seen a single frame of actual production footage, not one. And somehow, someway, the story just keeps getting weirder, because now, after all that waiting, the solo film might genuinely be dead, and what's replacing it is either the most exciting thing Marvel has done in years, or another slow-motion disaster. Depends on how you look at it. Variety and several insiders, including Jeff Snyder, all reported around the same time that the standalone Blade movie has effectively been scrapped. Not officially cancelled, but shelved in favor of something much bigger. The plan now seems to be launching Midnight Suns as a full-team movie, with Blade at the center of it, not as one member of an ensemble, as the leader. Think of it like a darker, stranger version of how Nick Fury operated, except instead of assembling soldiers and billionaires, Blade is pulling together a crew of supernatural hunters and monsters. And honestly, the more I sit with that concept, the more it starts to make sense, even if getting here was an absolute mess. Because make no mistake, the road to this point has been rough. Blade went through multiple writers, 3 different directors, and never once made it in front of a camera. The closest the production ever came was back in 2023, when Marvel confirmed filming would begin in London and a few other European locations. That version of the movie was going to dig into the European side of the MCU, with Kit Harington returning as Black Knight and the story picking up directly from the Eternals post-credits scene. It sounded genuinely interesting, and then nothing happened. No cameras rolled, no footage, nothing. Meanwhile, Thunderbolts got made, Fantastic Four got made. Both of those projects were announced after Blade and still crossed the finish line first. That's how stuck this thing was. Mahershala Ali has been locked into this role since day one, and to his credit, he has been vocal about wanting to make it work. He clearly cares about the character, but his more recent interviews have had a noticeably different energy. He essentially suggested that if things keep stalling the way they have been, he might walk away entirely, and that's a real problem because Ali is genuinely perfect casting. The physicality, the intensity, the ability to carry quiet menace, he has all of it. Losing him would hurt this project in a way that's hard to recover from. There's also the weird situation with Marvel Zombies, where the animated Blade that appeared was clearly modeled after Ali but voiced by someone else entirely. That's a strange choice, and it's hard not to read it as a sign that things behind the scenes were already complicated. Now here's where I want to throw out my own take, because I think the shift to Midnight Suns is actually the right call, but for reasons that go beyond just fixing Blade's development problems. The MCU's supernatural corner has been sitting half-built for years. Werewolf by Night was a cool experiment, but very short and somewhat limited in scope. Moon Knight is one of the most compelling characters Marvel has introduced in the Disney Plus era, and he fits the Midnight Suns lineup almost perfectly. A fractured identity, Egyptian mythology, street-level brutality. He basically wrote himself into this team. Elsa Bloodstone was introduced in Werewolf by Night, and immediately felt like someone who belonged in a larger story. Black Knight debuted in Eternals with the Ebony Blade, and has been doing absolutely nothing since. Ghost Rider has been teased and rumored for so long that at this point fans are just waiting for the confirmation. All these characters exist in the MCU right now, scattered across different projects with no connective tissue. Midnight Suns would finally give them a home. And then there's Mephisto, who technically made his MCU debut in Ironheart, played by Sacha Baron Cohen. The scene was awkward, no question about that, but the character is officially in the universe now. That matters, because Mephisto is one of those villains who can operate across storylines. He's a deal maker, a manipulator, someone who works in the shadows and rarely gets his hands dirty directly. That makes him a perfect ongoing antagonist for the supernatural side of the MCU. And here's a theory I keep coming back to. What if Mephisto's presence in Ironheart was intentional setup, a way of introducing him quietly before Midnight Suns puts him front and center as the real threat? Marvel has done that kind of long game seeding before. It would make that awkward scene feel a lot more purposeful in retrospect. Dormammu is another piece of this puzzle that frustrates me. He showed up almost 10 years ago in Doctor Strange, was treated like this massive cosmic threat, and then just disappeared, never mentioned again. But Dormammu operates in the dark dimension, which connects naturally to demonic horror and occult mythology. Exactly the territory Midnight Suns would be exploring. Bringing him back as a secondary villain, or even as an indirect force behind events, would be a genuinely smart move. You don't need to make him the main focus. Just let him exist as a looming presence. The script is reportedly being worked on by Michael Green, who wrote Logan, which is still one of the best superhero films ever made, and who also wrote the scrapped Blade solo draft. The fact that Green is still involved is probably the most encouraging detail in all of this. Logan worked because it treated its characters like actual human beings under pressure, and it committed fully to a specific emotional tone without blinking. If Green can bring that same discipline to Midnight Suns, this could be something genuinely different from anything Marvel has done before. The director situation is still open, but Kevin Feige recently mentioned wanting to collaborate with Sam Raimi again, and that comment immediately set off a wave of speculation for good reason. Raimi directing Midnight Suns would be almost too perfect. Horror atmosphere, demonic imagery, practical effects mixed with surreal visuals. That's his entire language as a filmmaker. It's also worth remembering that Multiverse of Madness originally belonged to Scott Derrickson, who had planned a much darker sequel centered around Nightmare as the villain, with Wanda gradually descending into darkness over time, rather than starting there. Creative differences ended that version of the film, and Derrickson has since hinted that his long-term vision involved Midnight Suns, with Doctor Strange as the one leading the team. The fact that Blade now seems to be stepping into that leadership role instead is a meaningful shift, and honestly, it might be the better version of the idea. What makes the Midnight Suns concept so interesting is that it could give the MCU something it has genuinely been missing since Endgame, a distinct genre identity. During the Infinity Saga, each franchise had its own flavor. The espionage thriller, the cosmic comedy, the myth-driven epic, the tech-based grounded story. But the multiverse era blurred a lot of those distinctions. Multiverse of Madness is probably the clearest example. Midnight Suns, done right, could have a completely singular identity. Horror, occult, dark, strange in a way that feels earned rather than just weird for the sake of it. Marvel already proved with Thunderbolts that audiences will show up for morally complicated characters who don't fit the traditional hero mold. That film's response showed that the old formula is no longer the only formula. Midnight Suns could push that even further, and the November release windows Marvel has mapped out through 2028 and 2029 include at least one slot that remains publicly unexplained, which is exactly the kind of spot a project like this would occupy. The most logical version of the story, based on everything reported, would pick up directly from the Eternals post-credits scene. Black Knight reaches for the ebony blade, Blade's voice interrupts him, and that becomes the starting point. Black Knight as the first recruit, someone Blade sees potential in, but also danger. From there, the team assembles. Elsa Bloodstone, Ghost Rider, Werewolf by Night, Moon Knight potentially circling the edges before committing. The supernatural MCU finally stops being a collection of disconnected specials and becomes an actual franchise pillar. Personally, I think the slower build would have been the more satisfying path. Start with Blade solo, let the character breathe, then bring the team together organically. But Marvel has been moving in the opposite direction lately. Drop the ensemble first and fill in the backstory later. Whether that works here depends entirely on execution. The pieces are in place. The concept is strong. If Marvel actually commits to the horror tone and doesn't soften the edges, Midnight Suns could end up being one of the most interesting things they've made in a long time. If they pull back and try to make it feel safe, it'll disappear into the crowd just like everything else from the past few years. The potential is real. Whether they actually reach it is the whole story from here.